All right. Today, we are going to look at the source and extent of pastoral authority. That's how we are going to begin. And then we will move into other topics of a pastor um, from the subject. First of all, the source and the extent of pastoral authority. By virtue of the indiscriminate commands for the pastor to rule and oversee. So look at that two terms there, ruling and overseeing. It is clear that the Bible sees authority as inherent within pastoral office. So what should we understand? We need to understand that if someone is selected to be a pastor, then yes, he has that right to rule and oversee. The congregation does not technically invest pastoral authority in men, right? It elects men to a position with inherent authority. So do not think that it is a congregation who gives the authority to pastor. Congregation selects one to be into that office of pastor. Because if someone is pastor, automatically Bible, God has given him authorities. It is impossible for a church to grant someone pastoral authority or pastor office while withholding authority. Authority belongs to the office, not the congregation. Congregation doesn't have the authority to rule. Congregation has the authority to give or select their pastors. Especially, pastors have broad authority to preach on topics that they deem necessary to the health of the church, to exhort, confront, and counsel persons in the flock without seeking permission to do so. All right, so pastors have that inherent authority to do what? To preach, teach subjects that are necessary for the church. Pastor doesn't need to ask permission from the believers. Hey, what should I preach? What is the subject that I should teach? They don't have to ask, right? They don't need to have a permission or to lead in worship, lead in evangelism, placing emphasis as they see fit to correct deficiencies and to promote appropriate congregational participation. And it is pastor who uses his wisdom to bring people into various services, like, okay, who will do what, those kinds of decisions usually are decided by pastors. So this does not mean that there can be no mutual advisement, but it does mean that pastors have considerable liberty to rule, oversee, shepherd, and preach as they see fit. So, yes, primarily the authority in the local church is for pastors, right? I know that some of the churches are, usually behave like, okay, they selected their pastors, but basically all the things are ruled by the church members. Church members decide what to do, but understand these church members have they don't have a lot of ideas about the ministry. They don't know, they have not studied well, like maybe a pastor have been trained, right? But they take decisions. They don't know much from the Bible, but still they do decision because some pastors think, or some believers think, that all the authority belongs to believers, and therefore it is believers should rule. But nowhere in the Bible it has suggested that it is the responsibility of the believers to rule the church. Believers are not going to rule, not supposed to. Pastors are supposed to rule the church because they are the godly men appointed to that office. But believers have the right to appoint their own pastors, right? Remove a pastor or appoint a pastor. Believers have the responsibility. So that is the first thing we understand about pastoral authority. Second, next point here, selection of pastors and ordination of pastors. How churches should select pastors. I know here is something that we have to keep in our mind. In many cases in our country, right? In many cases, this is pastors most of these pastors are church planters, right? Church planters. They begin the church. They begin the ministry. So they are there for throughout their life. I don't think anything wrong with that. But what happens when a pastor goes? Maybe he wants to resign. Maybe he's dead, right? Now the church is left with a leadership. Church is left with a leadership. What should church do? How should church select pastors? So here is the way that, according to the Bible, what we can do, we are going to look at. First of all, it is the church selects her pastors autonomously by vote of the members. Yes? So who has the responsibility to select their pastors? Not somewhere outside of the church, actually. Not a bishop, because the Bible doesn't teach that way. So church selects her pastors. It is the duty of pastors duty for the believers, church members. When I say believers, I'm not, and that may be a blanket term. I want to say members, right? Who are part of the church, born again, baptized, who are part of the church, who are the members of the church. They have the right to select their leaders. It's like pretty much like our country. Now we are running for an election, right? You're running into an election that is within a month, elections are going to take place in our country. Who are going to elect the leaders? Yes, the citizens of this country who are about 18 years old. Citizens of this country are going to elect. Not citizens of a neighboring country will elect the pastor of, the members of the parliament in this country. Or not American president is going to elect the leaders for this nation. Who are going to elect the leaders for this nation? People of this nation are going to elect the leaders. Just like that, once a pastor is out of the office, right? Pastor is out of the office, and the church needs a new pastor. Who is going to select the new pastor? Church has to select. But the question is, can we get the support of other pastors? Absolutely, yes. In the church that I pastored, or maybe we planted in Kerala, Kuduman Bible Church, yes, there was a need of transition for the pastors. When I resigned, there was another pastor came, but the church voted him in, but he had medical issues and he had to resign and go. So and another pastor had to come. The church selected another pastor. But did I help the church? I did. I did help the church. So should we expect help from other pastors? Absolutely, who are connected with the church. But ultimately, it is the church decides their leadership, right? We don't have papalism, Episcopalianism, or Presbyterianism, etc., right? The church elders do not function as exclusive self-perpetuating body above the local church, so we don't have that kind of system. So ultimately, who select the pastor of their church? It is the people once the church is established. Point number B, in so selecting elders, church is de facto ordering and ordaining them to preside over the life of the church. So once church select a pastor, basically he becomes, right, a de facto order, or he is one order. In historical Baptist life, ordination and installation were typically understood to be coextensive, right? You might have heard about ordination. I believe in ordination, right? Church is church ordained. In modern church, elders are often installed independently of and even irrespective of ordination, right? Installation is what? Appointing someone to be the pastor of that church. Today, ordination occurs when a church formally recognizes that individual has God-given gifts and skills necessary to the execution of the pastoral office. So there are two ways these days people do. People appoint their own pastors. He may not have been ordained. Ordination is if installing someone to a pastoral office is an informal thing, ordaining someone to a pastoral office is a formal thing. It's a formal thing where we have a structure we follow, which is called as ordination. Ordination. That is formal. Basically, the church, local church, recognize that our pastor, whom we see him as a pastor, we declare that he has all these skills, capability to function in this office of a pastor, right? That is what ordination. So the recognition is usually made on the advisement of a groups of elders from multiple churches, right? Which is known as ordination council. So for the ordination, we always have an ordination council. Ordination council have group of pastors, same faith and practice. They join together and make a council, right? This council is not a matter of biblical mandate, but serves only to recommend, not actually recognize the candidate, the suitability of the pastor office. So it is the church that can ordain. The local church is the one that ordained the pastor, but a council, we form a council to see the suitability of this person which the church wants to ordain, right? So the later function belongs to the local church alone. What is that? Ordination belongs to the local church. In keeping with the biblical pattern, ordination typically includes literal laying on of hands, right? Laying on of hands. This gesture is symbolic and does not communicate any real authority. So probably it's not a requisite activity. However, it is a helpful image of a church recognition of God's gifts in a man. So what we do? We usually do first installing someone to be in the pastoral office, right? Installing someone. I mean, we want usually the church does that work. And then once the church sees this person as fit for the ministry, all right, so installation is kind of temporary thing, because he's a new person who's been in the ministry, for some time, and he's working, but the church wants to see whether he's able to do the ministry of preaching, teaching, and other offices like baptism and communion and care, the shepherding care for the flock. Church understand this person has got the gift. Now the church wants to ordain that person, right? Ordination is by the elders of various churches gathering together who have the same mind, like-minded faith, gather together and ask questions about the conviction of the person, his doctrinal conviction, because maybe the ordination council wants to know what is his doctrines and things like that, so that they can make a recommend. Ordination council finally recommend the person to the church, and church ordains that person, right? So that is what ordination. We don't believe the ordination in some so-called high, like some bishop ordination or those kinds of things. We don't believe in that. We believe it is the responsibility of the local church to ordain its own members to the office of pastor. Office of pastor. Where do we see this ordination ministry in the Bible? Where do we see? At least there are 3 verses that we look into. Okay, let's look at these 3 verses. First of all, can you read, not from the notes, but can you read, anyone from your Bible? Acts chapter 13, verse 1 to 3. Acts 13. Acts 13, 1 to 3. Anyone? Can you read, please?
Now, in the church that was at Antioch, there were certain prophets and teachers, Barnabas and Simeon, who was called Niger, and Lucius of the Cyrene, and Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod in the Tetrarch, and Saul. As they were engaged in ministry for the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work I have called them to do. And when they had fasted and prayed and laid hands on them, they sent them away.
All right, here is church at Antioch laying their hands on Saul or Paul and Barnabas for the ministry, right? So primarily this is the church that did, of course, you know that this is 1st century church, right? And therefore you see that prophets and all other things, they were there. Let's go to 1 Timothy 5:22. 1 Timothy 5:22. Let's read.
Lay hands suddenly on no man, and do not share others' men's sins. Keep yourself pure.
Yes, if you look at it, is in the context of elders, right? What kind of elders should be there? So we read few things, you know, the elder who rule well, worthy of double honor, especially one who is working hard at preaching and teaching, is worthy of double honor. And do not muscle the ox. So talking about honorarium, do not bring accusation against an elder, right? So, and it adds verse 22, do not lay hands upon anyone too quickly. What is that laying hands? It is not slapping someone, but it is talking about the idea of ordination. Lay hands upon anyone too quickly, because you need to test and see what kind of person he is before you lay hands, right? And of course, 2 Timothy 1 verse 6, for this reason, I remind you to kindle fresh the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. It seems that Paul laid his hands on Timothy. So yes, Timothy was ordained. So what should we understand from these verses? Yes, there is a ministry or something known as ordination. Ordination, and sometimes we do installation. Installation is the preliminary thing. We install someone in the beginning of a ministry, maybe, or beginning of either beginning of a new ministry. We install a person to be the church planter, right? We install that person. That is also kind of laying of hands. That's a temporary principle. It's a temporary thing that we do. We want to see how that person can serve the Lord well. And once he is able to prove himself that he's able, that means in the beginning of the ministry, he begins the ministry, he's able to plant that church. then and he's able to teach and bring up next generation leaders in the church. And all right, so the church is able to recognize this person. We ordain that person, right? The church ordains, we don't ordain, church ordains, but I'm saying generally our practice. The ordination takes a little more time, whereas installation it's in the preliminary place. So what I want you to understand is that we try to distinguish a little bit. This is not a biblical mandates in all the way. Bible talks about laying on hands, but Bible says do not lay hands on anyone hastily. So take time, do not do that, right? So once a person is ordained, that we don't need, that person doesn't have to be ordained again and again, provided that he is part of a biblical church. If somebody has got ordination from an unbiblical church, and he has to be reordained for sure, no doubt. So yes, we believe in ordination of pastors, right?